Sir Rushdie, my name is Pawan Malhotra. On a lighter note, Imran has been a playboy, but you also had your time. The most beautiful woman around you. My
Saying Imran has been a playboy and you had a beautiful woman around you too.
But my question is, how is it that you still have the most beautiful and tall woman as your arm candy?
It's because I'm just irresistible.
The gentleman over there in the blue shirt who's just stood up, yeah.
Okay, I have two disclosures and a question. Disclosure one, I'm Kashmiri Brahmin. I would love to agree with you, but I'm trying to figure out why I can't. Disclosure two, I was at the Jaipur Literary Festival. I was so glad you didn't come. Because I had my wife, I had my daughter, and I kept thinking about bombs blowing up. And I said, you know, I've just come to relax and hear people.
Please, a question.
Question is,
no stories.
At what point of time, Mr. Rushdie, do you think or do you believe that liberty for yourself becomes license to abuse others?
Well, it's a loaded question, of course, because I'm not talking about liberty for myself. I'm talking about liberty also for the others to abuse me, which they have freely utilized. I'm not trying to say that I'm the only one who gets to speak, only that I also get to speak. The question of the limits of freedom are, unfortunately, these days people have begun to fall into the trap of believing that it is right to limit freedom at that point that you were mentioning, the point of where other people don't like what you're saying. I'm just telling you that if you go down that road, nobody will be able to speak at all. Because everybody can object, for whatever reason, to somebody else, and you silence all speech. That's the consequence of that mindset. It is better to be in a world where people say what they want, and if you don't like it, you say so in return. That's how the debate of an open society proceeds. And so, of course, I'm not saying that I'm the only one who gets to talk. Obviously, I'm not saying that.
It's interesting that because people formulate it a lot this way in the terms of, oh, you don't have the right to hurt me or abuse me. You kind of do have that right, don't you?
Yeah, and then they have the right to abuse me back.
Right.
You know? That's called democracy. Go to any parliament, you'll see it happening.
The gentleman here, right in front.
Thank you. I'm Atul Bajaj. So, Rushdie, have you ever felt that or regretted that you wrote the satanic verses? Not for anything else, but because of the hassle, the inconveniences, the danger, the tension that you had. And while I fully agree with the freedom of expression, but surely there has to be some limit of decency or, you know.
There you are again. You see, surely there has to be some limit. No, there doesn't, because nobody is forcing you to read the book. You know, it's not compulsory. If you don't, there are plenty of books I don't like, I don't read them. You know, if you don't like it, don't read it. If you're quite enjoying it, you come to a... I mean, life's too short, you know. Life is too short to force yourself to read a 600-page novel that you don't like. You know? So, I would strongly recommend that you find another book, you know, if that's your point of view. This is the reason why, when you go to a bookstore, there are books by many different people. No, you see, I myself feel that that's a sort of mistake, and there should only be my books, of course, you know. But for some reason, sometimes people prefer other books, and they must be allowed to do so. I mean, that's all I'm saying is that's all there is to it. Books do not easily offend you. You have to work really hard at it. So.
The gentleman here. I don't think you can ask me a question.
This is just a reference to something that you mentioned about hate speech.
Yeah.
The Indian Criminal Code has section 153A, which is actually about hate speech. But nobody that I know has ever been convicted, especially politicians, have been ever convicted. They might have been charged, a few of them, but nobody I know has been convicted. So what is your view about the role of having hate speech as a crime in the Indian Penal Code, even in the US, I'm sure it's there?
Yeah. No, I mean, this is an interesting question, because first of all, I have to say that it's extremely annoying to me to have my novel described in these terms. Because I think if anybody actually reads the satanic verses, as opposed to just having an opinion about it, which seems easier, they will notice that it's not a book of that sort, you know. But the question of hate speech is one on which different democratic societies disagree. You know, for example, in England, there are laws against hate speech, racial hate speech. There's a Race Relations Act, which means, in theory, if you make racist remarks, you can be arrested and prosecuted and sent to jail. You know? And that's how the British have come to define what is proper and what is not proper to say. Now, the United States has a different view. You know, the First Amendment is so powerful that it defends even hate speech, which is why people like members of the Ku Klux Klan can stand up and make racist speeches, and they're not prosecuted. You know? So these are different ideas about how you proceed in a free society. The British have one view, the Americans have another. I have myself over the years, come closer and closer to believing that the American method, the First Amendment method, is preferable. Because my view is you do not end unpleasant thinking by banning its expression. You know, what you do is you drive it underground, and in some ways you make it more powerful by giving it the excitement of taboo. You know? When stuff is out in the open, that's when you can demolish it. You know, when stuff is banned and secretly in corners, it becomes glamorous. You know, the glamour of being forbidden. It must not be underestimated. So I've come round to the view that it is better not to have legislation, even against the most hateful of hate speech. You know, because then you can, when it's made, you can counter it. You know, it's better to do that. It's better to have it out in the open where you can see it, and not under the carpet where you don't know what it's up to. You know? But there are two views about this, as I say, and different societies draw that line differently.
Also, there's a distinction between attacking someone for something they're born with, for the color of their skin, for instance, than attacking a religion or something which is a system of belief.
Yeah, that's certainly true, that there is a great difference between race and religion, because one is chosen and the other is not. And I remember during the last years of the Labour government that, well, Tony Blair was particularly anxious to bring in a law outlawing religious hatred, which was a parallel to the race hatred law. In other words, to bring religion into the same bracket, if you like, as race. And I recall going to lobby against this law at the Home Office in London with the comedian Rowan Atkinson. Mr. Bean and I went to Whitehall to argue against this. And of course, the funny thing was that all the people we met, junior ministers, civil servants, they were all fans of his, right? So they all wanted him to love them. But he did not love them. And he said, I remember at one point, he said, you know, there was a sketch in my television show recently in which we used some footage from, I think it was Tehran, Friday prayers in Tehran. And over this footage, I had the line of voiceover which said, and the search goes on for the Ayatollah's contact lens. And he said, so would I be allowed to say that, or would I go to jail? And they were, of course, saying, no, comedy, we love it, that would be just great, there's no problem. And he said, well, how would I know that it would be all right if this law were to be passed? And he said, it's very straightforward, you just show the script to a government committee and they'll approve it and then you can do it. And he said, well, that's what we used to call the Soviet Union. And this law failed in the British House of Commons by one vote. By one vote, and that vote was Tony Blair's vote because the whips had miscounted and he went home early. You know, had he been there, the vote would have been tied, and the Speaker would have had to cast the casting vote in favor of the government, and it would have become the law of the country. So England escaped that law by 1 vote, and that's as close as it came.
Rahul, and then the young gentleman over there.
So Rushdie, as someone who's been able to forecast trends in society, especially politically and culturally, given what we've seen, and you spoke of Rahul, Akhilesh and Omar, where do you think India is heading as a society? Are you concerned that as a country, we could be mirroring Pakistan in some time from now? And do you feel a sense of betrayal, Sir Rushdie, at the attitude and behavior of the Indian government?
I think one thing one can be confident of is that however bad things get in India, they will be worse in Pakistan. I think it's a little disappointing that these leaders who are supposed to be the face of the next generation and so on should be behaving in such an old-fashioned way. I don't know, maybe they'll grow up. It's my belief that people can grow up sometimes. As far as prophecy is concerned, I'm really bad at it, actually. I have had some trouble with prophets in my time. and on the whole, I'm not applying for the job. I think people who forecast the future, it's a mug's game, I mean, I think the futurology is the business of being wrong about the future. The future always surprises us. I think we don't know. We don't know. I mean, I hope, because I think this kind of debate, the one we're having now, which I hear more and more in India nowadays, that's a constructive debate. And I hope that it can lead the country in a more constructive direction, and that the new leadership will pay attention to these ideas. I think we have to be optimistic. And this is a country, this is not Pakistan, fortunately for us.
Gentleman over there.
Since religion is at the root of the debate, are you a religious man, and do you believe in God? If so, why or why not?
I think if you'd been following closely, you would have understood that I'm not a religious man. No, I mean, I was meant to stand in the way of that question. No, I mean, I've not been religious since I can't remember when. Actually, I can remember when, but never mind that. It's simply, as I was saying earlier, it seems to me that the way in which religion has developed in human history is as a way of answering the 2 greatest questions of life. The first question is, where do we come from? The question of origins. How did we get here? And the second question is the question of ethics, which is, now that we're here, how shall we live? And religion, all the religions, today in their different ways, try to have answers to those questions. They try to answer the question of origin and the question of ethics. And my view is, the one thing we know about all religions' answer to the question of origins is that it is not correct. That is not how the world came to be. It is not Indra churning the world in a great pot. The Manthan did not take place. It's not God making the universe in 6 days and resting on the 7th. It's not, as the Nordics believed, a giant cow lying at the bottom of a bottomless pit, tossing in a nightmare, and her udders creating friction with the rocks, and the sparks turn into giants and gods. These things did not happen. They may be very beautiful stories. I think most of them are very beautiful stories, as a matter of fact. And we can appreciate them as beautiful stories, and I do. I think many religious texts are filled with beauty and with no shortage of wisdom, often, But they're not true. They're untrue in the same way as the Satanic Verses is untrue. So I don't have the need to have origins explained to me by religion, and I certainly don't want my moral sense to be given to me by mullahs of any kind, mullahs or priests or ayatollahs. No, thank you. I'd rather work those things out for myself. So for me, it's not useful. I have to say that given that I've been associated with some pretty well-known atheists of the Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens kind, that there is a slight difference in my view from theirs. I mean, Christopher, who was never a man who understated things, You know, if Christopher could say things in capital letters and underline them 3 times, that's what he would do, with the saving grace that he was very funny. But his view was religion is absolutely bad in all settings, in all circumstances, bad thing, and should be eradicated. My view is a little less neon lit than that. I mean, I think that it is quite clear, as I said, that there's beauty in the religious texts. It's quite clear that there is understanding of human nature and wisdom in these texts. And it's also quite clear that people derive nourishment from them. You know, that people derive comfort, stimulation, a sense of self, whatever it may be, they do. And it seems to me it's not my business to tell them that they must not. That's not my business, that's their business. And if that's what they get from religion, good for them, I don't care. I care when that becomes, when religion enters the public arena and when religion starts trying to tell other people how to live. At that point, it becomes politicized, and then it's everybody's business. And that's the point at which I object to it most strongly.
Kali, Devika, and that gentleman over there.
To follow on from what you've just said, you don't believe in religion, you don't believe in God. But what do you hold most sacred?
I mean, I don't have the idea of the sacred. You know, I mean, I have things that I like, you know. I like going to the movies, I like reading books, I like good food. And I haven't, you know, I think the serious answer to the question, it is often said by religious people that without the framework of religion, it's impossible to have a genuinely ethical or moral sense. How do you have a sense of right and wrong when you don't have some kind of ultimate arbiter telling you what that is? My view, as I said, is that religion doesn't come before ethics, it comes after ethics. That it's, in a way, my view is that religion is that human beings, I think, are in a way kind of hardwired for ethics. You know, in the way that Steven Pinker wrote about us having a language instinct, I think that human beings may well have a moral instinct. That, you know, that we are born wanting to know good and bad, right and wrong. You know, we all want to know that from the very early times of our lives. Religion is one of the systems for codifying right and wrong, good and bad. You know, but it's not the thing that creates those values. It's one way of responding to the need for those values. I think it's perfectly possible to have a deeply ethical and moral sense without having any religious belief. And I think the world is full now of people who would agree with that. You know, I mean, this is not the only way to be. The disbelieving atheistic position is also an ethical and moral position. And I would say that anybody who was to read my books could see that they are interested in moral concerns and they are ethically questioning. You know, they're engaged with the subject of right and wrong, good and evil, you know, and how complicated those things are to actually define sometimes. You know, and one of the subjects of the Satanic Verses is it possible for angels to do things which are bad? Is it possible for benefits to come from activities which you might call demonic? You know, let's say the moral questions are muddied. Good and evil are not often clear. You know, I mean, Graham Greene's famous novel, The Quiet American, is a novel about how the title character does appalling damage in the world because he believes he's acting morally. You know, he believes that he's a good guy, and he does terrible harm in the world. And that moral ambiguity is a proper subject for literature, always has been, and is something which I'm concerned to investigate, you know.
Devika, over there? Or if you have a mic earlier, then you can... Well, there's the mic. Well, we can...
Mr. Rushdie, I've been wanting to ask this question for a long time. The Islamic culture has contributed so much to civilization, and you as somebody who stands as a Muslim has had the opportunity to put the record straight, to change the stereotyping which has been hijacking the Muslims of the world today, who stand there with their heads hung in shame because of a few people who decide to tear them apart. You have that platform. Why haven't you used it?
Well, I think, as I say, you haven't been paying attention. I've been using it all my life. Midnight's Children is a novel which places the Muslim experience at the heart of the story of the independence of India. The central family of that novel is a Muslim family. The Enchantress of Florence is a novel which goes into the subject of Mughal India and celebrates it. You know, didn't I just say that I think that 95% of the Muslims of this country are not in favor of the things being said in their name? I think that's something I've been saying as long as I can remember. So, yeah, I mean, all I can say is I'm sorry you missed those things, but I have been trying to use the platform in the way that you suggest.
The gentleman over there?
During your entire discourse.
I can't hear.
Is he a threat to you?
Please take the mic, and I don't think...
Could you get me?
I can hear you now.
I am brief in question. Please give your reply also in brief.
We haven't heard your question.
My question is Imran a threat to you? You have referred him and during your entire discourse. He is nobody in the polity of Pakistan as of yet. But still you have referred him in your entire discourse. Is he a threat to you?
No, no. Imran made some remarks about me, and I'm entitled to answer them. I feel staggeringly unthreatened by Imran Khan. I mean, there are ex-girlfriends I feel more scared by.
Right here, please.
Salman?
My name is Akhilesh
do you
Mittal.
find this
Hello.
rise of bigotry?
My name is Akhilesh Mittal, and I think the partition of India is something that we are still living with and will continue to live with. And that was something caused by the British, divide and rule. And unless we address that problem, you see, 1856...
I'd like to hear a question in the next sentence, please.
The question is, are you aware of what 1857 did to India?
Yes, I'm a student of history, but hold a history degree, and actually specialized in the history of India from 1857 to 1947, so yes, I am aware of it. Whether the partition of India is entirely the doing of the British, I think there might be people here who would disagree with. Seems too simple an answer. Actually, I come from an Indian Muslim family that did not go to Pakistan initially, wasn't interested, you know, and was like the very, very, very large number of Indian Muslims who felt like that, who felt, if you like, more Indian than Muslim. And I'm happy to have therefore had the chance to grow up in Bombay, not Karachi. I think my life would have been very different and much less enjoyable had my parents made the other decision. So, yes, of course, partition is a terrible thing, but I'm not exactly sure what you want me to say about 1857 or 1947. You know, I'm against the way in which the Indian uprising was suppressed. I'm against it. But is that news? You know, I think most of us would feel that way. This is 2012. You know, the subject has changed.
Do you feel that have we moved past partition in India? Do you feel that that wound has healed?
Not completely, but I think, you know, you look across the border and you're quite pleased not to be involved with that stuff.
Salman, my question is that this rise of bigotry, intolerance, is it really something India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Malaysia, or is this also manifesting itself in Western societies, those which we consider liberal? And one thing, you made a very good statement, freedom the way you want to live. Now, why do you ban burqas and penalize it? That's not freedom of speech. It's also a way of living. Why do so-called secular democratic countries criminalize wearing of burqas.
Well, only France, as far as I know.
Yeah, maybe, I don't know Switzerland, maybe France, yeah.
No, I mean, of course, it's a good point, and one should say that this problem of the rise of what you could call at its lowest level political correctness and at its highest level intolerance is not only a subcontinental issue. You know, I mean, you see it elsewhere too. There have been, in the United States in the last years, attempts by the Christian right to ban the novels of about Harry Potter as being promoting witchcraft. You know, there have been attempts to ban all sorts of books that you would find ludicrous. You know, Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-Five comes up on a lot of lists of books that people want banned. So that impetus to censor and ban is not unique. Of course, it's not unique to us. And it's something which, speaking as somebody who's very involved with International PEN, and in particular with recently British PEN and PEN American Center, this is something that we fight all the time everywhere, not only here. But, you know, we're here now, and so it's right to speak about the issues that are most vivid here. I mean, the banning of the burqa, I mean, as I said, the problem with banning things is you make them more glamorous. You know, you don't devalue the burqa. I mean, I come from a family which despises the burqa. You could try and get any woman in my family into a burqa. You know, they'd give you quite a hell of a fight. But to ban it in some way gives it an authority, a greater authority. And it's, I think, just a politically bad move. I do think that there's something, and I've said this and was unpopular for saying it in England, that the way in which young people, young women in the British Muslim community are increasingly deciding to wear not the full burqa, but at least, you know, some kind of headgear, chadar, as a kind of badge of identity. You know, and wearing it, if you like, with pride, saying this is what shows people who we are. You know, and it's worn in that spirit. I would argue that that is what that discredited philosopher Karl Marx would have called false consciousness. That a thing which is done as a choice in England, it seems to me, weakens the condition of women in the very great part of the Muslim world where it is not a choice. You know, where in most of the Muslim world, this is forced on women and is a symbol of the repression of women. For Western Muslim women to put it on as a badge of honor, it seems to me, is a betrayal of their sisters who are being oppressed. And so I would object to it for those reasons, but I'm not in favor of a legal ban. No, I think it's not a thing for the law.
I'm afraid we have time for just one last question. The gentleman in the suit who's been very patient in the gray suit over there. Yeah.
Sir, my name is Bjorn from Denmark, one of the Nordic countries. So in passing, I must remark that your description of our religion was correct 1,000 years back, but we have converted twice since then, so we are an adapted species. My question comes from the fact that also Denmark had its stint with Muslim rage 6 years back with the so-called Mohammed drawings, and that spurred a debate. Now comes the question, how do we best balance the freedom of speech that also we hold sacred with the respect for others, not forgetting either side of that equation? Sir?
Well, I wondered if the so-called Danish cartoons were going to make an appearance, and how appropriate that it should be a Dane who raises it. Thank you. See, I think in the matter of the so-called Danish cartoons, there are two separate issues. The first issue is, should they have been published? If you were the picture editor, would you have published them? No? And that's a perfectly legitimate inquiry because newspaper editors every day are given material that they have to decide, am I going to publish that, am I not going to publish that? And no two picture editors would actually make the same choices. You know, there would be, if you say, give the same 10 or 12 cartoons to 10 different picture editors, some of them would publish maybe one or two, some of them would publish them all, and at every decision in between. So that's just, if you like, a journalistic decision of what you publish and you don't publish. I myself think that most of those cartoons were not at all funny. And since the purpose of a cartoon is to be funny, I would not publish most of them. I mean, it's also true to say that the ones that were funniest were also the ones that were rudest. You know, so the one that I remember is the one where the martyrs are arriving at the gates of heaven and the prophet is asking them to please stop doing it because in heaven they're running out of virgins. You know, now, I would publish that because it's funny. You know, so that's one question, and I think we could all disagree about whether we would have published one of them or all of them or none of them, etc., and that's a perfectly fair question. The second question is, what happens when the response to their publication is that of the threat of violence? And at that point, it stops being about religion. It becomes, how does a society confront the threat of violence? You know, and I would say at that point, I would have recommended that every newspaper in Denmark reprinted the cartoons, all of them, as a way of saying we're not going to be bullied. We will not give in to the threat of violence. You know? And so they're separate issues. You can have different opinions about the cartoons themselves. You can object to them. You can think they're boring. You can think they're brilliant. But how you respond to violence is something which any democratic society must have a very firm line on. You do not concede. Because the one thing that you can guarantee is that if you give in to the threat of violence, there will not be less violence afterwards, there will be more. And what you're doing is to create a climate in which the threat of violence is legitimate and works. And that you can't allow to happen.
Thank you.